Beside me, I have 4 sets of Cerwin Vega speakers that need no introduction. But just because I can, here's one anyway. Welcome to Saving Vegas, and today we're going to be going through everything you need to know about the Cerwin Vega VS series. So whether you possibly just bought your first set of Cerwin Vega speakers or your first set of the VS series, hopefully I'm going to cover everything that you need to know about these speakers and maybe a little extra. I've had these speakers in the shop now for a little bit, haven't got a chance to really get into them until now. It's not very often that I'm always going to have an entire series in the shop, so I thought it'd be a great time to just go over everything all at once, cover things specific to the VS series, and then also dive into them individually. I just figured a good video going over all the fine details of these speakers would be a really good idea, and hopefully you guys enjoy it too. So not only am I going to go through some of the detailed specs, I'm also going to get them all hooked up to my 4-way speaker selector, and I've got a Kenwood 100 watt per channel amp I'm going to use to run them, and I'm going to switch in between all 4 different sets and give you guys a listen. So if you stick around to the end of the video, I'm going to throw that in there, and it's actually quite surprising the difference in the 4 speakers. Some of it is obvious, but some of it was actually quite impressive. But first things first, let's dig into some specs. Let's start with the name VS. What does VS stand for? It stands for velocity sensitive. What does velocity sensitive mean? Well, they're claiming that their speakers have a very fast transient response. So what does transient response mean when you're talking about speakers? Well, we break it down. A transient is a burst of energy at the start of a sound that creates a peak in the audio waveform. So here's an example of a transient. So as you can see here, the 4 peaks bracketed in red, that is your peak in the audio waveform. And then the response is what follows after that. So by velocity sensitive, Cerwin Vega was just saying that, hey, our speakers are really accurate. And in order to get an accurate reproduction of sound, a speaker should be able to recover very quickly from a sudden peak in that audio signal. So their claim is that their woofers have a very fast transient response. So there really isn't one thing in particular that makes up for this fast transient response in their woofers. It's just a combination of all the parts they used: the voice coil, the die-cast aluminum baskets, paper cone, and then of course foam surrounds. They also mentioned the use of curvilinear cones. So I had to take a look at other woofers from Cerwin Vega, and this one here is a 15.2 WR from a D9, and you can see the cone is very flat, right from the spider to the edge where the foam surround attaches to. It is pretty much a straight shot. And when I compared this to the VSW15 out of the VS150, you can see that it is not a completely straight cone from top to bottom, that there is a pretty good curve in it. Well, now that we got that out of the way, let's move on to the specifications. Not a whole lot to talk about with the specifications here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the sensitivity rating and the impedance, so the nominal impedance. If you look at the sensitivity ratings, they give you a decibel reading per 1 watt per 1 meter. And sometimes you'll see manufacturers give their sensitivity rating and it doesn't say 1 watt per 1 meter, but it says 2.83 volts per 1 meter. So at 8 ohms, 2.83 volts equals 1 watt. And if you look at the specs here, the VS80 and 100 are rated at 6 ohm and the 120 and 150 at 4 ohm. So if they were to rate their sensitivity at 2.83 volts, it would be at 4 ohms because that's the nominal impedance of that speaker for the 120 and 150. That would equal 2 watts. Here are the rest of the specs. If you guys want to read through this, go ahead and pause it. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to start pulling the drivers out of the cabinets, and then we're going to go through some of the markings on the back and just go through a few things to help identify these drivers if maybe you're looking for some replacements or maybe you just want to know. Here we are, all the drivers laid out on the workbench. Let's start going through them. Let's start with the VS80. So, two-way, you got a 1-inch tweeter. So this one here you can see on the markings, it says VST1 and then 8, not simple, so that's 8 ohms. This is something you'll see sometimes, or sometimes you're going to see this number. So now this actually specifically says 8 ohms, and then you've got this SS2010 for the tweeter. It is the same tweeter for the VS80 and the VS100. So you're gonna see just a smaller magnet, and yeah, pretty easy to identify. They've got the positive terminal, it's almost like some red marking on it, to determine what is the positive and what is the negative. These get hooked up, positive to positive, negative to negative. Pretty easy to remember that. So the numbers you're looking for this tweeter, when you pull it out, you're gonna look for either that VST1 marking on the back, like this one has, or you're gonna be looking for an LSH SS2010, or just SS2010. Sometimes they might not have the LSH in there, like this guy, because it just gives you the SS2010. So both the same tweeters, little different markings on the back. They're both 8 ohm. As you can see, they're quite identical. So the VS80 2-way, that's the 1-inch tweeter, and we've got a 1-inch woofer. Now this one is all completely factory. I don't know if the foams are or not. I'm going to assume, but most of the time you see, well, yeah, they're in pretty rough shape. You can see the cracking. And we flip to the back side, and just like all of them in the VS series, you've got a die-cast aluminum basket. And you know what? A pretty beefy magnet for an 8-inch woofer. It's got some weight to it. So this is going to be a VSW8. And this one is marked with the year, and this one's August 9th, 1993. If you're looking for recone kits or any parts for this thing, you need that model number is VSW8 for the VS80. It's gonna be a following trend for the woofers. The woofers are quite easy, actually. Okay, let's move on to the VS100. Again, with the tweeter, we already went through this. It is the exact same, the VST1. Once you move to the VS100, you get a 3-way setup. So we know the tweeter is a 1-inch VST1, and then you get a mid-range. This is just to cover that. Sometimes they should be glued on there a little bit, but if you carefully pry, they should pop off quite easily. And yes, it looks like, oh, well, same as this guy. So closed steel basket. They've got the red dot here to determine which is the positive and which is the negative. And closed style basket, felt, vented. And this guy is going to be an LSC UK 2000. And right on there it says 8 ohms. So there's going to be 2 different markings you're going to find on these. Sometimes they're marked with this, and sometimes you're going to see a marking on the back. It might just say ATM5, so that's also another model number that will be marked on the VS100 mid-range. Okay, 10-inch woofer for the VS100. Flip her around. Again, like I said, the woofer is going to be pretty easy. This is a VSW10. I believe it almost looks like the same magnet as the VS80, and I think it is. I could be wrong, but yeah, they both have the same size magnet on the back of them. Okay, VS120. This is where we're gonna see the first difference in the tweeter. Now, they do have this extra piece on here. So this extra piece on the back, I don't know 100%. I'm going to assume that it might have just a little bit to do, make it a little bit more powerful. You're going to have a little bit more magnetic energy in there, possibly, or maybe it's just for power handling. I don't know 100%. But just like the other ones, these are marked with a little bit of red on the positive side of the terminal and then nothing on the negative side. These get hooked up positive to positive, negative to negative. See, the marking on this one has got ST2010, and then I didn't know this, but this looks like a 4-ohm, so it might be a different diaphragm in there now that I think about it. I'm gonna have to get my multimeter on these and see what they read out at. Another marking you might see on these, just like the other one, it's gonna be a VST2. So you see a lot of people refer to these tweeters as T2. So you got T1 for the 80 and 100 and T2 for the 120. And then to the mid-range, like we had this is what I was talking about with the glue. There. Didn't take much, a little bit of damage on this one. Okay, so on the back you'll notice, now this is completely open, vented basket, and they've got a plus and minus marked on the terminals to determine which is which. Now again, these get hooked up, positive to positive, negative to negative. And then we got our markings in the back, and just like everything else, there is going to be 2 different model numbers for these. So this model number being LSCSN2010. You may also see marked on the back a DXM4, but some are marked with one and not the other. So that's that guy. Now we'll move on to the woofer, and it is VSW12. And this one manufactured August 1st, 1996. So this is now, you step up in magnet size as well as diameter, of course. Not a whole lot to talk about there. This one also, the dust cap size is going to step up to, I believe, is it 3 3/4 inch dust cap. The other ones would be 2.5, I believe. I have to measure, I don't remember the numbers all the time, but yeah. Oh, this one, I know you see this every once in a while. Sometimes they have the dates marked elsewhere. So yeah, the magnet's marked VSW10. And then if you look here real closely, you see it's marked November 19th, 1997. So you can look for markings anywhere on the basket. I mean, it might be on the magnet, might be here, it might be on the sides here. They should, and most of them will be marked with a date. Just if you're wondering, it's a good way to tell if your woofers are matching to that set, if they have the same date and model number on the back. More than likely, they're the original drivers for that speaker. Okay, now to the big boys, the VS150s. This is where we get a significant change in the tweeter. The entire outside of it is larger, so just from looking at it from the front, it's really easy to tell that this is for the 150. It is a soft 1-inch dome, and we got markings on the back. So 8 ohm, and here's would be what is the stock number for this tweeter, and that is LSHSU2010. And this is also referred to the VST3, and you may also see those markings on the back. Now, I've said it over and over and over again, and in most of my videos, when you guys are pulling these apart, always make sure to see which wire goes where. But in this case, with these VS series speakers, but this VS 150, they've got a small terminal on this side, which would be the negative, and they've got a large terminal on the positive side. So it's very difficult to get these backwards. In some series, these are hooked up in reverse polarity. So I think maybe the first versions that came out, they may have had them hooked up that way. So pay close attention to where your plus sign is on the tweeter and what your wires are. So on mine, the large terminal is on the positive wire, which would be the blue wire without the black stripe on it. And then the black stripe blue wire went to the negative. I've seen them both ways. I think it was an earlier version. There may have been some changes. I don't know if there was changes in the crossovers themselves. It was a little different layout. Some crossovers, I think in all, they're pretty much the same, but they were laid out a little differently, and obviously there were some changes because they had the polarity reversed. But look at the size of this magnet on this tweeter. Like, this is, everything in this VS 150 just says it can handle a ton of power. And yeah, it's proof is in the pudding, right? So these are very, very, very good sounding tweeter. I really like these ones. And the VS 150 also gets a larger, better mid-range driver. This guy's also a little stuck on there. There we go. So you can see that there's larger foam. Well, it's actually a fabric, sorry. A larger fabric surround on this guy, and there's actually some excursion to this guy. And again, a very decent sized magnet on the back. So it is larger than the mid on the 120 and 100. And also, like the other mid ranges, there's a negative and positive marked on the terminals themselves. This mid range is hooked up positive to positive, negative to negative. And we get this model number again. Oh, try to get in the camera, there we go. So this is a DXM6, and marked on the back of mine is LSCSP2010. So both of those model numbers are for this 6.5 inch mid for the VS 150, also used in other models as well. So sometimes you'll see the DX M6 marked on here, and other times you'll just get what I believe is Cerwin Vega's stock number. All right, so that's the mid. Last thing is this nice big 15-inch woofer. Shares the same size dust cap as the 12. And if you guys have guessed already, yes, it is a VSW15. And this one's stamped with the date. And the date on this guy is September 15th, 1997. So the magnet size is the same on the 150 and the 120. So that tells me, and I've looked already, they're matching. My VS 150s are manufactured in 97. My 120s are manufactured in 1996. All 97 as well for my VS 100s, and then the VS 80s. I can't remember, what was the date on that? 93. So these are the oldest of the bunch. Actually, to tell you the truth, I think this is the oldest VS series speaker that I have worked on. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I'm gonna go through, and we're just gonna do, we're just gonna ohm them all out, do a resistance test on these guys, see where they're all at, and hopefully they're all, I'm sure they're all good. I don't think I had any issues with any of these being inoperable. So what they're at is probably what yours are gonna be at or should be at if they're good. But I guess we'll find out. Now let's move on to my favorite part. Let's get all these hooked up, set up, and give you guys a listen.